Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's Global COVID-19 Show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and I'm so delighted to be able to host this show despite all the troubles we've been having around the world. Today, we have a special episode, number 282, and we're going to talk about where we go as a planet. What have we learned this past year? And what can we do for all of us to have a better outcome in the months and years ahead? And we have just the right person to help us have this conversation. Dr. Vishakha Desai is here. She's the author of World as Family, A Journey of Multi-Rooted Belongings. She's the former president and CEO of Asia Society and a renowned scholar and advisor at Columbia University. Her book you will be hearing about, you can see the book jacket there, but you'll be hearing more about it when we meet her in just a few minutes. Hi, everyone. I'm Sree. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your incredible support this past 15-month period. During this 15 months, I have learned so much, and you have all shared with us what you've learned and how the show has been part of your lives. We know that now we're in a different stage in the pandemic, but your support of the show every single week is so meaningful to me. So thank you for that. And if you're watching us for the first time, welcome. We are delighted to have you. Our guests have been more than 525 guests. We're proud that 303 of them have been women from 75 cities in 22 countries, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. And we've had doctors, authors, journalists, CEOs, founders, teachers, professors. And our guest today, you heard from her titles, is a lot of these things. And we're in partnership with Scroll Global and Scroll.in. Very grateful to them. And our archives are at youtube.com/SreeNet. Please hit subscribe. And we wouldn't be able to do this without our awesome producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31, who now has her own show, and please follow her to learn about that. And Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. She will be live tweeting along with Rose, so please look for those. And I'm the Marshall Loeb visiting professor at Columbia. I was at Columbia for 20 years, so often I'll say Columbia, but at Stony Brook School of Communication and Journalism. And I'm the CEO and co-founder of Digimentors. We are a social media consultancy, but we also do webinars, talk shows like this. We help people have a better digital footprint. So if you need any help, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. You can just email me and we can talk about how we can help. And so let me now bring on our very special guest, Dr. Desai. Again, she is the author of World as Family, A Journey of Multi-Rooted Belongings. And she's a former president and CEO at Asia Society. And she is a very senior scholar and advisor at Columbia University. So with that, please welcome Vishakha.
Hi, wonderful to be with you.
Well, we're so honored to have you here, Vishakha. We have been friends for 20 years. We've been on stage together countless times. We've been in even more number of meetings, both fun and not so fun meetings, as meetings can be. But this is the first time you and I are having a conversation like this in this kind of format. But this is the format we've been living with for 15 months now. My first question always is, how are you? Where are you? And how's your family been handling the pandemic?
Well, first of all, let me just say what a thrill it is to be with you, Sree, even though we can't see each other directly in person, but it's as good as it gets, you know. For the last 15 months, I have to say, the crazy thing is that I had about 8 trips between last March and December that I canceled. And that made me think about, do you really need all those trips? At the same time, I am actually quite well, partly because during this time, the book came out just, in fact, a few months ago. And I had a chance to really change some of the things in the book because of COVID. So in a way, not that I wish COVID on anybody, but I am grateful that I had the time to sharpen my thoughts about where do we go from here in the universe, in the world, but also in a very personal way, where does each one of us actually think about leading our life that is responsible in a much more global way than we've ever thought before. So I am grateful for actually having that time to reflect.
And of course, knowing you, I'm sure in addition to this book you've written, you must have done so many talks and presentations and convening that you were so good at in that, that beautiful sandstone building on Park Avenue, but now doing it through these electronic means. So reflect a little bit on where we go in terms of communication and connections.
Right. Well, the funny thing is, as I said, that I canceled 8 trips. Out of 8, 7 were international. Some of them to India, to Africa, to Paris, you name it. And then I really actually have been thinking about where do we go from here? Partly because I think we have to recognize that what COVID has done, what this pandemic has done, is both exposed the issues that we sometimes want to avoid. They have just put them in stark relief. And one of those issues that I talk about in the book, World as Family, is that we are not able to think of ourselves in relation to the whole universe, even though 99.9% of our DNA is the same. We seem to fight over that 0.1% that is different. And at the same time, culturally, we seem to be more and more into tiny little groups and more into divisive tendency, us against them. They're not the same as us. Social justice movement that is coming up in America, very big, that really makes us think about how do we do this? And for me, what I really thought about is that one of our problems is that we want to put people into little boxes, whatever that box may be. And that box makes the other person be the other, whichever that other may be. Not me, not like me, and therefore not good enough, or I don't have to deal with them. We forget in that process that we are really part of this universe. And the universe, I mean, not just humanity, but also the universe of the natural world. And look at where we are with not just COVID, but the climate crisis. And the world as family, this wonderful ancient phrase that actually is a Vedic phrase. And we all kind of learned about that, right? Vasudeva Kutumbakam, we say these names and it's And I actually had almost given up on that phrase as a title because I thought it's too kumbaya-ish, it's like too idealistic. And then COVID happens. And I said, it's really time to double down on this phrase because the brilliance of the phrase is something we have not been able to do before. And that is, how do we think of ourselves in relation to the universe? Family is a perfect unit. All of us know that at least in a functional family, I have to qualify that, you understand and learn what it's like to be an individual in relation to the unit. Sometimes you have to recognize that not everything you want is possible. I grew up in a family of 7 kids, so I knew, and I'm a third from the top, right? So I knew that you have
Wait,
to.
so you were in the middle.
I'm right in the middle. And so you have to learn to say how to be in the middle, but also to be myself. So that idea of independence in relation to interdependence, you learn in a family, at least at the beginning. What if we applied that concept to the whole universe? To say, how can I be an individual in relation to the collective? And that collective is 7.7 billion people of humanity. And that collective is also the natural world around us. The Vedic wise, I had to say that, but men did know that's why they use this phrase. And the full phrase is really quite beautiful, which is to say, only those of a limited mind think of their immediate family as their own. Those who are wise or magnanimous understand that only the whole world is your family. Think about that.
Beautiful.
We're going to go somewhere, that's where we need to go.
Sure. Sure. I know you have a copy of the book right there. So tell us some of the themes that you tackle. There it is, World is Family. Tell us about some of the themes you tackle and why people should pick up this book, available everywhere.
Well, the first thing I should say is that I decided to write this book, which is a very personal book, unlike exhibition catalogs I've done or the academic work I've done. Partly because I was very concerned, being at Columbia, that the word global was getting too abstracted. It was getting to be kind of as if it's rootless. And what people have as an idea is the Davos man, or even a Davos woman going around from one place to another, having no roots. It's kind of very generalized, very privileged. And I kept saying, why am I so passionate about this thing called global? What is this? And I teach, in a committee on global thought. I run the program for graduate students. And these young students who come from all over the world, they would actually ask questions like, I'm committed and interested in critically thinking about the world, but is it possible to be locally rooted and globally conscious? Is that actually doable? And that made me think, how have I lived that life? So partly this book is really my way of saying, this is my journey. And that's why the multi-rooted belonging part is a very important part of that title. And that is that actually the more people find themselves in places that are not what they thought were their own, the more people imagine to be in a place that somebody else is in, to put themselves in another person's shoe, actually that's the beginning of opening and creating an expansive sense of belonging in the world. So all of us who are immigrants, or all of us who like to read books about other parts of the world, or see films from other parts of the world, all of that actually allows us to be more empathic about people who are different from us. And that's the beginning, I feel, of getting to this idea of global belonging. But let's also face it, the global is relational. I don't have to give up my Indianness or my American connections or my Ahmedabad roots to connect in the larger world. So that, as I write about in the book, there are at least 6 identities I have. Sometimes I'm an Indian living in America. Sometimes I'm an Asian American. Sometimes I'm an Ahmedabadi girl who lives in New York. And sometimes I'm a New Yorker who happens to be from Gujarat. Each one of these are very specific, contextual, and real. It is not just the words I use. And lots of other people have talked about this. So the reason why I think that it's important for each one of us to reflect on how do we create a sense of expansive belonging is that it begins right at home. How do you raise your children? What kind of experiences do you give them? And how do you continue to reflect on those experiences so you learn from that? So this book is kind of an iterative book. It is a book about learning of that journey and recognizing that it is not a walk in the park, not a piece of cake, pretty confusing sometimes, and I talk about that. But the possibilities are also pretty thrilling. That's the thing that, so I'm really arguing for messiness. I'm arguing for liminality. I'm arguing for out of that, it's like a lotus that comes from mud and muckiness of water, and something new emerges. And it's out of that that we create this third space that we so desperately need. So that's my way of saying, you can all do it. We can all do it. Just do it your way, but do it.
Excellent. And we want everyone to pick up that book, order it online or order it from Columbia University Press. I know that you will really enjoy it. Let's look at some of the comments that have been coming in, including Jonathan Borstein's watching from the East Village. And he has watched 282 episodes. So it's an incredibly wonderful friend. As we go to these,
okay.
Jonathan, Vishakha, as we go to these different places, I'd like to ask you for a memory of each of these places. Let's start with the East Village.
And you want me to tell you?
Yes, something about the East Village.
My God. Okay, so I will tell you my favorite memory of East Village is actually when I was at the Brooklyn Museum in 1972 and going to amazing movies at the St. Mark Theater, and then going to the West Village and going to a jazz concert. And I had the opportunity and privilege of seeing Charlie Mingus, Miles Davis in person at the Village Gate, Village Vanguard. Unbelievable. So that is my favorite memories of the Village, East and West. East Village was a little iffy at that time, I have to say. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. And Apollo is watching from Montclair, New Jersey. He was a guest on the show from Vegas. So if you have a Vegas memory instead of a Montclair memory, or you can do both.
You know, I've only been to Vegas once, but my memory of Vegas is actually to do with what somebody asked me. And that was that I was talking to somebody on the plane and they were saying, where are you going next? And I said something about, I'm actually headed to Bellagio. And this guy says to me, you don't look the type. And I said, what? And he said, but I mean, Bellagio, Las Vegas, you don't look like that. And I realized that I was actually talking about going to the real Bellagio at the Rockefeller Villa as a fellow for the Rockefeller Foundation. And I had no idea that there is a complete replica or something of Bellagio in Las Vegas. So I was very embarrassed that I didn't even know that such a thing existed, you know. And then I went to Las Vegas for a conference and I saw it and I recognized that. But my first memory of Las Vegas is how other people think of the name and there's a completely different world, you know.
Yeah. I mean, many people, especially who are not Americans, remark about when they hear about the University of Notre Dame and they think that's how it's pronounced here and that there is a church with a different name, a cathedral in Paris. Let's see. Paula is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Have you ever been?
I haven't been to Tallahassee, but I've been to St. Petersburg. Does that count?
I know it's not close, but
not
yes,
quite
we'll have it count for sure. Let's see here.
Florida is not a place I know well.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to couple of places. Miami I've been, but not to Tallahassee. Yeah.
Neil Parekh, who you met, is watching from Springfield, and he's pinged his mom, Sudha Parekh, who you knew both him and her late husband and Neil's late father, Dr. Prakash Parekh, who is a great journalist and lawyer, and
a friend of my father's. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's connecting. And let's see here. Stefan is watching, and he says hello from Ramsey, New Jersey. And Pradnya Haldipur says greetings from Silver Spring. And great.
Hi, Pradnya.
Yes, you know her, and from, of course, the Asia Society Mafia. Your former colleagues are everywhere.
Amazing. Well, I have to tell you, Sree, that one of the things I think a lot about is when I was appointed as the president of Asia Society. I don't know if you remember, but you said to me, I never thought that if there was going to be an Asian American president or an Asian president, there'll be somebody from India. That you thought absolutely it would be Chinese by a long shot.
Yeah.
And that you were shocked. And indeed, there were a whole lot of other people who were shocked too, you know, but there you are.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because in part in America, when you think about Asia, traditionally when people say Asia, they mean East Asia, partly for historical reasons, all the wars that America fought in East Asia, for example. But in England, when you say Asia, they mean South Asian, and they think of East Asian second. What was coming to grips with that like, especially when you ended up running Asia Society?
Well, it started even before that, and that was in Boston when Dukakis was running for president. I was at the Museum of Fine Arts, and I met some of the Indian Americans who were helping him. And then they got me involved, and they got me appointed to the Massachusetts Humanities Foundation or something. And I began to recognize that this idea, and up until that point, I'd been in America and I always thought I was an Indian in America. That's how I thought myself. And then I began to hear these people talk about Indian Americans. And I began to meet other Asian origin people. And it made me realize that actually it's a constructed identity. There is no question about that. So initially it was East Asian, and then it was the Census Bureau that connected us all. And the truth of the matter is that it is our American experience that as immigrants that actually connect us rather than our Asian background. So often people say, what do Indian Americans have in common with Chinese Americans? Not a lot, because their backgrounds are different and there's not like an Asian connection there. But it is true that our American experience of being seen as the other and being actually put into different boxes of certain kind of prejudices that come together, or the model minority or whatever there is, actually it is that experience that connects us. And we should use it, because individually, let's face it, we don't have numbers. It comes to having affiliation, alliances, and building where we can fight together and where we can't. So things that we need to fight for in America, it behooves us to actually come together. And it's not just Asian Americans, it's other people of color too, even though their issues are not the same. So we have to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time, to figure out that my being an Indian at a certain time doesn't mean I can't be Asian American. And at the Asia Society, I really made a big point of that, because it had to do with the fact that collectively, we needed to think of this immigrant experience, even though lots of people wanted to peg me only as an Indian, including a Chinese ambassador, which I talk about in the book, where just after I was appointed, I hadn't even taken the reins yet, and I went to China. The first place I went was to China. Why? Because I knew they would have an issue. So I'm taken to lunch. Former ambassador, speaks English beautifully, was in France, was in Vienna, all kinds of places. And after all the formalities are done, and the guy says to me, who are you? And he says, when I close my eyes, I only see an Indian girl, Indian woman. But when I hear you, you sound American. Mm-hmm. And I don't get it. So I finally thought, okay, I think we're going to go with the metaphor, because Chinese like metaphors. And on the spur of the moment, I just sort of said, if I were a tree, my roots would be Indian, my branches would be American. But if I were a fruit-bearing tree, my fruit could belong anywhere. But only in America is that possible. And my husband, who was also a former president, and he was teaching at Beida at the time, he's on the other side, and he's like, his eyes have opened up, first because we were shocked. Nobody in China would ask such a question.
Yes, it was a direct question. Yeah.
I mean, this is incredible. And to this day, I think that was a pretty damn good answer,
Especially spur of the moment. I also want to connect this to the idea of South Asia also. I like to say that there are no South Asians in South Asia.
Right.
You become South Asian when you come here, because as you know, you could grow up and have a full, say, middle class life in India never meet a Pakistani or Bangladeshi
Exactly.
or Sri Lankan, etc. But when you come here, there's power in all of us banding together, as we have with
Exactly.
Asian Americans, as we have with Hispanic and Black Americans.
Exactly. And we could actually make some collective understanding of each other that otherwise is not possible. I mean, I am very privileged because I've been to Pakistan 4 times
Wow.
and for various projects and exhibitions. And the first time I went, I'll never forget it. It was almost as if I was meeting estranged cousins. There was so much that was shared. And yet, it was as if we just, if only we could kind of connect more often, have some family reunions, it would work, because there was so much affection also, people to people. And as we learned later on with the cricket matches and other things that were going on. And so, to some extent, you're totally right about how we create these identities that are expansive. Let's face it, we can choose them. They're not given to us. And that notion of identity as kind of fixed and only one thing is in itself a misnomer, because we always grow, we evolve, we learn things, and therefore we accept new things. The goal is to remember to be capacious, to be open, and connect with people in different ways. So, for example, I was an exchange student, and the book talks about that. This was more than, oh my God, 50, no, more than 50 years ago, almost 60 years ago. It's scary. It's scary, I have to tell you. 55 years ago, that's it. Um, and when I meet other exchange students, AFSers, like meeting Christine Lagarde, she was an AFSer. And the first thing when I tell her that I'm the chair of the board, and she says, "Oh my God, it changed my life. I'm in Ghana, the richest man in Ghana." And I asked him because I knew he was an AFSer and he had been to Minnesota. And he starts talking about it, and he's tears in his eyes. And that's kind of another family. So I think we create connections and communities in many different ways through shared experiences. Our problem is that we focus too much on divisiveness, not enough on connectingness. If you notice this picture, this is a picture of cells,
Mm.
human cells, tiny cells, that my husband, who's a China scholar, has become a painter, and he was totally obsessed with cells series. And he did this, and I thought it's a perfect image for this book, because these are tiny cells that we all have in our body. And yet, if you look at it, it also looks like a sun, a sunflower. It expands all over the world, and it has a sense of centrality. And I said, this is it. This is the book. And so I was very happy to have the art right in my own home. So, and I didn't have to pay him anything on top of that, right?
That's great. I hope he's happy with the credit he got.
He did. He is. He was thrilled to have a cover.
Excellent. Let's look at some of these other comments. But let me just remind everyone, we're talking to Vishakha Desai, and we're talking about her book. We're talking about her career. She's going to give us some tips about leading in a world of change, the way we're all living now. She has tremendous experience leading organizations and helping folks and mentoring so many people that she's mentored all over the world. Let's look at some of the comments coming in. Subbalakshmi says, "This is such a beautiful talk. How lovely it is for me to begin my day listening to this." And she's watching from Bangalore. So welcome. And a Bangalore memory from Vishakha, please.
Oh, my first Bangalore visit was on the school trip when I was in 8th standard in Ahmedabad. And I went to one of those very fancy, it was a plane company or something, where they were making some planes or parts or something like that. Very big scientific thing. And we had to take our shoes off. And I kept thinking, well, I only take shoes off in temples. So what is this all about? And then the teacher I was with, she joked and she said, "This is like a modern temple. You have to take your shoes off because otherwise you bring too much dirt in. But it is also a sacred space for modern India." And that is my first memory of Bangalore. Since then, I've been many times. And of course, it's also about amazing traffic jams trying to get to Infosys, but that's a different story.
Yeah. Jonathan says he remembers that reaction in Asia Society when you were named and people noticing that. And Paulo is telling everyone who's joined late that you're a professor at Columbia, but you hail from Gujarat. And that's because one of our guests, one of our viewers, thought you may be from Colombia. So you are a universal person.
Right. Not
But
the
she understood.
Right. I have very good friends in Colombia. And actually, they often talk to me and said, "Are you an advisor to the president of Colombia?" I said, "No, the president of the Columbia University," right?
And here is a name you recognize. Sunita Mukhi says,
"Oh my
you are
God.
phenomenal." So you could say hi to her.
Hey, Sunita, where are you? Are you in Manila?"
Yeah. So let's. She'll speak back, and then my mom.
Hear you.
My mom is watching from Kerala, and she says hello, and she says, "Hi, Vishakha. Nice to see you after so many years."
No. Well, you should be very proud of your son. He's amazing, doing so well.
Thank you. And Sudha says, you had such great exhibits at Asia Society. I'll still remember exhibit on Emperor Shah Jahan, Mumtaz Begum, and Taj Mahal. It was very popular. We enjoyed and took the children to witness the history of the Taj. And Apollo has a question for you. Do you think connection is challenged by the geopolitical tensions between the US, China, and India, the mistrust with COVID and economic competition and espionage? Or is there going to be a reconfiguration? So that's a great, big, meaty topic that I want you to address in 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. Well, I think
I'm joking. Please take your time.
No, but you're absolutely right that right now, as I was saying, that I think the world is very divisive. And I think especially India, China, US, or US, China, that's a particular point of contestation. And I think something that's very worrisome for many people, because it's also caught up with the rise of a country that has actually not been seen as a global leader for last 300 years. And they know that too. And they are determined to become the leader. And that is hard for a country like the US that is used to being the leader of the world. And I think that it will be worse before it gets better. I truly believe that. In that context, I think India's place is very important because to some extent, India and the US shared at least some values of democracy and the governance systems and things of that sort. But India economically today is quite weak. And it has to do with not just COVID, but even pre-COVID. Our economic growth is going to come in the way. And I've noticed sometimes I say we, I mean India. Sometimes I say we, I mean America. And sometimes I say we, and I mean the world. So apologies for that. But I do think that along these tensions, why we need to constantly work on rising above them is because the tensions can lead to the kind of catastrophe that you don't want to see in the world. So as a colleague of mine used to say, when there is so much heat, we better create some light. And that light can only come from deeper understanding and personal connections and understanding that the answer is not mutual destruction. So let's just face it, those tough times. But if glass is half empty, are we going to try to work towards making the half full part a little fuller? That's the goal.
Awesome. Here's Pradnya is tagging her friends, and I encourage all of you, tag a friend who would love this conversation, who's interested in the world, interested in Asia, and they can watch live or join us later, and they should get the book as well. And so she's tagged Michelle Caswell, Judy Kilachan, Karen Karp, we're all great
Asia
friends.
Society family, of
Yeah,
course.
exactly. You don't like Asia Society Mafia, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think of Asia Society family.
Okay, we'll go with family.
I tell you why, because I think that actually we did create something like that. And I'm very proud of the kind of connections that people have made, that 10 years after they've left, they still connect with each other.
That's wonderful.
Pretty special.
Nermeen and Anne are also being tagged here, and everybody please do that. And Asfika says, this is beautiful, ma'am. I'm glad YouTube notified me. I'm definitely going to read this book. So glad to hear that. And Rajan, who's watching, says, good evening from Long Island. And I'll have to catch the replay later on. Thank you all very much, and be safe, strong, and healthy, which is, of course, wonderful from him to say that. And I see Pradnya still tagging people. Savita, Gwen, Mena's Fancy.
My goodness.
It's just great that she's doing that.
I should mention that in India, the book is published by Penguin Random House.
Oh, good.
So
And is it out already?
as well. Yeah.
Is it out already? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So talk to me a little bit about how you were able to, tell us about your journey a little bit. And I wanted to culminate in becoming leader of a kind of quintessential American institution. What was that journey like? And what are because I imagine there were many forks in the road, and, you could have gone in many different directions. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think that in a way, I pay a lot of attention to how I grew up in India. And that was being born 2 years after independence in early independent India in a Gandhian family. Both my parents were big freedom fighters. My father was a leader of the youth movement, in and out of British jail, was kicked out of college for raising an Indian nationalist flag. My mother was a co-founder of one of the first women's institutions in India. So for me, part of, I think, my journey goes back to how we were raised. And that was that principle that Gandhiji had actually said that my father really practiced. And that is to say, what Gandhi said was that let our floor of the house be strong, but have the doors and windows open so the other winds and spirits can come through the house, but they will never shake us. And that idea, and going to a Gujarati medium school, inspired by Gandhi, not an English medium school, and really learning about modern India by doing these trips starting from 4th grade on, all of that was really about opening your eyes and being open. And then at the age of 16, in 1966, to come to America as an exchange student and to live with an American family, when there were hardly any Indians, believe it or not. People didn't even know where India was most of the time. And they thought I was Spanish or Mexican or something like that. And that year, height of Vietnam War, really changed my life, because I recognized that Vietnam was often seen as war, not a place, not a country, not a culture. And I had to do some speech, and I did it. And then recognizing that if, God forbid, there was a war with India from the United States, people would say India war. They wouldn't know that it has 5,000-year-old civilization. They wouldn't know that it has this rich, rich culture, and that there are people and homes and rivers and mountains and whatnot. So I came back to India, committed that I was going to be a political science major, but with a culture as a secondary element. I was also trained as a classical Indian dancer. So the long story short, it was through dance that I get into the museum world. And at the Cleveland Museum, and working with African-American kids to actually get them excited about India. They didn't even know where India was. And 6 weeks later, they were roaming these galleries, and Shiva Nataraja was their friend. That kind of a spirit and the possibility of museums made me realize that actually what I'm really interested in is cross-cultural connections. And museums are a perfect place to make those connections happen. Hopefully, therefore, the war that one was talking about would not happen. And that got me into the museum field. Otherwise, I was going to really be a poli-sci person, IR, with cultural background. And that was kind of my thing, you know. I'd even heard of SEPA at the time. And I thought, okay, that's where I think I'm going to go. But I think this was actually a much better trajectory for me. And then professionally, what that meant was going through the art history program, getting a doctorate, and coming back. But then I always having this tug of war inside me sometimes that museums are more than art objects. Museums have to be seen as institutions where people of different backgrounds can actually connect, especially museums that are more so-called encyclopedic museums, which I now call the museums of partial histories because they're not really encyclopedic, but that is a whole other conversation. So in 1990, I was pretty sure after being in Boston that I was going to give up on the museum world because it was getting too corporatized and too much about money and too much about objects. And I was going to go and teach. And I got actually tenure at UMass. And I wanted to work with first generation of immigrant kids who were really going to college and getting them excited about this world, because art history was also a very precious little thing, you know? And I'm always about trying to break down those kinds of precious, fancy walls. And then Asian Society happens. And I almost didn't go, but it was the possibility that Asian Society was more than a museum, that it was policy, it was education, it has all these other possibilities, so that the museum would never be just about things. And through things, you could actually create something more. And so when we started doing contemporary art shows that nobody was doing at the time, it was my way of breaking that notion of Asia as exotic over there, the past, and not in the present. And I realized that all of us art historians were also part of that problem. We were culprit in ignoring that, and that I had the obligation to do something, and I had the opportunity. And out of that emerged the whole program of contemporary art culture. Lots of my colleagues were involved with that. And then when Asia Society was looking for the president, as I mentioned in the book, I actually initially said I'm not a candidate because I was because they didn't just offer it to me, which they could have because I'd been there for a long time, but more
national search, right? That's what they call it. Yeah.
International search.
International, yeah.
And I said, you know what? You do your search. I'm not doing it. Richard Holbrook was the chair at the time, and there was a search committee. And then some of the board members who really knew me well, and they say, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. And they had two finalists, a university president and a former ambassador, both white men. And they said, if you're not happy, will you come and talk to us? And I said, sure. And that's what happened. But the reason why I say this is that I was also very aware that it were like they had to jump through too many hoops, you know. I was a woman. They'd never had a woman president. B, I was from Asia. They'd never had that. C, I was from the cultural side. I wasn't a policy or the ambassadorial or the historian or the, you know, all of that. So I said, this is way too much for them to cover. There's no way. They can't do it. And so there you are. They proved me wrong. I proved them right, you know. But I think that what all of that says is that at that time, and that's not that long ago, mind you, there were no women of color or women generally of international organizations in America. None. At the art museum directors, where I became the president briefly in the professional organization, there were exactly 2 women of color.
Hmm.
And people used to confuse us. So the other one was Kinshasa Conwell at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And when they appointed me as the president, and I said, I just want you to know that my name is Kinvaka, and the Vinkasha is over there. And whatever you say to her will come right back to me because we're the same. It was funny, but you know what? It was also, these are people who knew us, and they still were making a mistake. And she's African American, mind you. I mean, it's like, okay, this is not a whole lot of similarities here. However, I think that this country, especially those of you who live here, we have a long way to go in recognizing leaders from non-Euro-American backgrounds as leaders. So if you look at Asian Americans in the university setting, there are plenty of professors, plenty of distinguished people. But university administration presidents, you can count on your finger. And that needs to change, and we have to work on it. So my goal is I work with lots of young people, especially women of color, because you don't want to be the only person. You want to have collectively many more people who can take this role. In a global setting, same. There's so few people in the global leadership position in global organizations that are actually women or women of color.
So let's give some tips and encouragement to young women watching and women of all ages. What are some of the things you learned along the way, and what you learned in managing such a big, complex organization?
Right. I think that there are a couple of things. One is that, and my colleagues who work with me would recognize that at the Asia Society, I often used to say that we are like a family. And that is how to listen to people and give people the space to do the work they need to do, but also make sure that if there is a problem, that they come with a solution as well, not just with a problem. The second thing is that, especially now, I really encourage young women to say, if you find yourself in a problem situation, there are 2 ways to do it. There are multiple ways to do it, but one is either you make the other person feel really bad, and then they feel like they have to be defensive, or you can actually say something that says, this is what I see. I realize you may not have meant it like that. Or systemically, how might we change? So I'll give you an example. When I was made the president, I was appointed as the president of the Asia Society, and Richard Holbrooke actually announced and was quoted in a paper saying that, we want everybody to know that we did not hire Vishakha because she's a woman, because she's of Asian origin, and that we had these 2 other candidates, but that we hired her because she's the best candidate. And I actually, it kind of didn't sit well with me. And I had also talked to a couple of my colleagues, and Holbrook was not somebody who say something in public and make you feel bad, right? So
he was a larger-than-life character for people.
Larger than life, all of that. And so I said to him quietly, I said, Richard, don't ever say that again. And he said, why? I'm giving you a compliment. Yeah. It's colorblind. It's blah, blah, blah. I said, because I'm a woman, because I'm from India, because I come from the cultural background and the museum side of things, I will be a different president. And I want to be able to bring my whole self to work. And I said, just don't say that. And he was like, he fumed and he said, but I gave you a compliment. I said, it doesn't matter. Just don't say it. Yeah. But the point, that story that I feel is that there are ways to do it without making people feel bad. And there are ways to also bring your whole self to work. But I sometimes find, at least now, is that people get too quickly into the guilt and the blame game. And when you do that, you really are not reflective yourself to what are you bringing to the table. And if you make people feel bad, it just simply means that they're not going to get to new place because they're going to try to defend themselves. It sounds a little therapeutic kind of like thing, what you do in therapy, but I do think that it's important, and especially for people who find themselves who are in the minority.
Sure.
But you have to keep pushing. You have to keep. It may be that this doesn't work for everybody, but I think of myself as an insight subversive. So either you can hit your head against the wall from the outside, or you get inside and you keep opening up. But my theory of change is really more not an artificial log, a wonderful fire that happens quickly and then it's gone. I'd rather use charcoal, take the time, build a fire that lasts a long time. Something that actually can systemically change. But that is my way of doing it. It may be that it doesn't work for everybody, but at least it's worked for me. I mean, sometimes some people would say that there's some places that I stayed too long because I didn't push hard enough, which is probably true. But it's worked for me.
And it has, and how well it has worked. That's amazing. I promise you this would be about 35, 40 minutes. We're already at 55 minutes or
Oh my
so.
God. Amazing.
I want to just get a couple more questions in, and want to thank everyone who's been watching, of course. But I do want to ask you about the Me Too movement and what it has been like to watch this, led mostly by women who are kind of a different generation. Without talking about necessarily your own experience, you've seen
Right.
it all around you. Obviously, the way we talk about Me Too being about the kind of terrible things that men do, but we also know that even when they think they're being nice, they can, be saying the wrong thing. So talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Me Too movement, in a way, you could say it's high time that these things came out. But I suppose, as I said before, that I live in the subtle gradations. So I like gradations and I like not to make things into black and white. And so that's just sort of where I sit. And one thing that I feel we have to be careful, and I realize initially you can't do that, you just have to push it out there. But what we do have to be careful is not to put everything in the same box. So Harvey Weinstein is one kind of an issue. Then there are all these other gradations, and some people would say even Al Franken doesn't quite fit that bill. But the big thing we have to think about is that how do we work with men and other people to actually, what Gloria Steinem has been saying lately is that we need a male liberation. And that is to get them to feel comfortable in other ways so that they don't have to be in these predatory positions all the time. And that's a whole different kind of education that we need to do for men. Um, at the same time, I mean, in my own life, I will say that there are a couple of times where I really, it was not that I was assaulted, but I was taken advantage of professionally, where I was doing two jobs with one salary. And I didn't have the wherewithal to figure out. It was the first time, and I was maybe 30 years old. At the first time, I said, I always thought that if you did good work, you'll get rewarded. What I didn't count on is you'll get rewarded with more work, but not more salary. And I didn't even know how to do that. And I hope that that kind of situation doesn't occur, that we have to create ways for young women to actually ask for what they deserve, which is a different thing from the Me Too thing. But it is something about worth, self-worth, and sense of self that really has to be taken into account as you go forward.
Thank you. Look what Chetna says. Brilliant insights. Jonathan says, brilliant show. Wonderful guest. Thank you. Apollo says, this is an awesome show and I've learned so very much. Thank you all. So that's just awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of housekeeping notes. I'm going to come back to Vishakha and ask her a final thought. I know she's not a marketer, but I'm going to ask her to tell us why everyone should get the book and what they will learn one more time. So I'll give her a moment just to think about that. And thank you all for watching. I want to tell you about another show we have coming up on Sunday. Many of you know that we host our show called the New York Times Read Along. For 5.5 years, we read the Sunday newspaper out loud like crazy people, and we do it on all these channels: my Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And we have an incredible guest for Olympic week, and that's Neil Umdor is with us. He's a former reporter and sports editor for the New York Times, an author, director, and producer. He'll tell us about the time he was in a hijacking of a plane. He had an incredible relationship with Arthur Ashe and other major sports figures. And so you'll hear all about that if you could get up at Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, or you can watch on the recording on any of our channels. And we'd love to have you join us. We do this every single Sunday morning. And Neil Parekh, who was commenting earlier, is our executive producer of that. And we will continue to be doing shows here on the COVID show, and next week we will have one of our monthly episodes within Diaspora, so please do tune in for that. So let me remind you that we're talking to Vishakha Desai, who I promised we'd let her go 15-20 minutes ago, but she's still sticking in here at 10 p.m. at night, and she's the author of World is Family, A Journey of Multi-Rooted Belongings, someone I've admired and known for 20 plus years. A great friend and collaborator at Asia Society, where we did many partnerships with the South Asian Journalists Association, with Columbia, where she is now a renowned scholar and advisor to President Bollinger. And that's what we should remind everyone is Columbia University that we're talking about. And here she is. And I asked her to give us some final thoughts about the book and anything else she'd like to say.
Well, let me say, you're right. I don't quite know why I think you should read this book, except for the fact that I think if you're interested in reflecting on your own life, and if you're interested in thinking about how do you build a sense of belonging, I think this book might be interesting for you. People tell me it's a good read, so I hope that's true. There are lots of fun stories, so that should be good. So it's both got stories and it's got reflections and it's got thoughts. So I hope that it's a good read for you. But I would say that what has been really special for me, Sree, is that the book has really become a catalyst for conversations of many different sorts. From IR world, international relations world, to culture world, to diaspora world. Different people see different things in it. And what has been fantastic for me is that it actually is a catalytic conversation that makes people think. And that seems pretty nice, you know? And I'm humbled. So
It's great. Thank you for sharing your wisdom tonight, but thank you for your friendship of all these years and for doing so much to bring the world together as a family and to encourage people to connect and share and learn together. Our guest has been Vishakha Desai. We're very grateful to her. And we want to thank everyone who's been watching, everyone who sent us these comments. So Subulakshmi is still watching in Bangalore very early in the morning. And she says, thank you to Sree and Vishakha for this wonderful talk. And Neil says, it's always great that we have a Neil as a guest at the New York Times Read Along, which he will get to do in just a couple of days. So with that, Vishakha, thank you very much. And we'll say,
thank you, Sree. Wonderful.